I am Katie from the blog Hearts Content Farmhouse, and today we are going to be making sourdough baguettes at home. The word baguette can seem a little bit scary. It sounds very fancy and very foreign, but it's really not. It's just a different method of shaping. With a baguette, what you're looking for is a really firm structure so that you can cut this bread up and use it for appetizers, dips, things like that. You also want a really browned and crisp crust. That's part of what makes baguettes so appealing. So I wanted to develop this recipe using a sourdough starter. It doesn't have a super strong sourdough flavor, but you can tweak the recipe to get more of a pronounced, more tangy sourdough flavor. This recipe is very, very flexible. So as a general rule, when you are working with sourdough, a longer, cooler rise makes for a more sour flavor. A faster, shorter rise is going to taste more like a traditional white bread. So just be flexible with your rising times, especially with that final rise. If you want a sour flavor, put it in the fridge until it's risen. If you want more of a traditional flavor, just leave it out on the counter or even in a very slightly warmed oven. We're going to start by just combining all of our ingredients. If you want to knead this in a bread machine, that's fine, but what I would recommend is first you put all your ingredients in a large mixing bowl just to sort of get a feel for the consistency of the dough. Most of the time when I'm doing a sourdough recipe, I don't use my bread machine unless it's for sourdough rolls. Something like this I'm going to knead by hand, and even if you do want the machine to knead it, first we want to make sure that the dough is not too soft or too dry, especially not too soft, because we're making a baguette which has a shape, so it needs to be able to keep its structure on its own. So we're going to combine 2/3 of a cup of water, 2.5 cups of bread flour, half a teaspoon of sugar, 1.5 teaspoons of salt, a cup of fed and vigorous sourdough starter, and 1/4 teaspoon of instant yeast. Now if you're not in a hurry, this recipe will work without the yeast. I always put it in just because I just like to be sure that I'm going to have a good result. If you're really confident in your sourdough starter and you have the time to wait, it's going to work fine without the yeast and just can rely on your starter alone. If your starter is newer or if you're newer, I'd really recommend adding that yeast just to make sure everything comes out well. So like I said, we do this all in a mixing bowl. Just mix it with a spoon or by hand. And you want your dough to be soft and doughy, but not in any way floppy or wet. So what I do is I mix it all together and then I let it sit for 20 minutes. And I find that sometimes it looks more hydrated over time as the flour and water mix together. And if I don't give it that rest, I'll end up adding too much water and the dough will be too floppy and it won't keep its shape and be a nice round baguette. So give it that rest, come back and see. It might look a little bit dry, especially drier than what you're used to if you're a regular sourdough baker, but just go with it. If it's a dough and it seems smooth, relatively smooth, try to resist the urge to add more water at this point. Turn it out onto the counter and knead by hand 5 to 10 minutes. Since we're doing a long rise, you don't have to be overly obsessive about how much you've kneaded this dough. The longer the rise, the less important your kneading is. So like something with a pizza dough that rises overnight in the fridge, you don't have to worry about getting gluten windows or anything like that. You just need a smooth dough. This recipe is the same. Don't worry about kneading for 20 minutes and stretching out to look for windows. Just knead it until it's smooth and move on. So once it's kneaded, we're going to put it into a clean bowl and cover it, let it rise just like any other recipe, slightly warm environment for an hour. Since I'm going for more of a sour flavor with this, I just left it out on the counter, which in the kitchen was cool at the time, and I let it rise for 2 hours. We are going by sight. It should be very puffy before you move on to the next stage. A pretty good tip is whenever you're trying to shape a bread or a dough where you're stretching things out, you want to first roughly shape it, let it rest and relax, and then shape it again. So I'm just going to divide the dough in half and make 2 sort of rough logs and let them rest about 10 minutes, cover them up, let them rest, then come back and stretch them out into the final baguette shape. When you're shaping the baguette, one thing you want to consider is you don't want a bunch of crease lines all over the outside of your bread. You want the places where you folded to be on the inside. This is really more for looks than anything else. So I just kind of pinch the baguette so that my pinch seams are on the inside of the loaf instead of on the outside. If you can really get obsessive with this and worry about it too much. It's not really that important. Just sort of shape it into what looks good to you. And as you do this recipe more and more, you can worry more and more about it being beautiful and perfect. For now, shape it, smooth it out, move on. At the shaping stage, I like to go ahead and rub the baguettes heavily with flour on the top and with cornmeal on the bottom. And then I place them onto whatever I'm baking them on. I'm using a special baguette baker, and that just helps the bottom of them keep that rounded shape. It's perforated so that they don't stick, and it really just helps sort of round out the bottom of the loaves. It is by no means necessary to use this. You can use just a baking sheet with parchment paper on it. It's just the bottoms of your loaves are going to be a little bit flatter. I'm only using it because I have it, because my parents gave me one they weren't using. It's not something I would necessarily run out and buy. So you put them onto whatever they're going to bake on. You cover them. Do heavily greased plastic wrap for this, because they'll rise and they'll stick, and this is one of those recipes where if it sticks, like I said before, this rice is very flexible. It can go slowly in the fridge. It can go quickly in a slightly warmed oven. That is personal preference about how sour you want them to be and how much time you have. So we need to look at them, and when they are ready to go, or a little bit before they're ready to go, start preheating your oven. This is going to be a really high temperature, 450 degrees for 20 minutes. Before you take them out, tap them, make sure they sound hollow. You really don't want these underbaked. Take them out and let them cool on the counter before you slice them. They are great for any type of appetizer, dip, or for slicing for sandwiches, and they freeze very, very well. So I hope you enjoyed this recipe. If you're looking for something a little bit different to use your sourdough starter for, this is a great option, and it is perfect to serve with a fall or winter dinner. So have a good day.